Welcome to the Wire Conversations. I'm Trisha Gupta, a freelance journalist and a professor of writing at the Jindal School of Journalism. We are here today to speak to the extraordinary filmmaker, teacher, writer, Saeed Mirza, who is here with us in the Wire studio in Delhi. And we're here on the occasion of his having written his latest book, which is called I Know the Psychology of Rats, illustrated and designed by Nachiket Patwardhan. Welcome, Saeed Saab. It's a pleasure. I was wondering whether, Saeed Saab needs very little introduction, but I'm going to say for those of us watching, for those of you watching that don't know his work, he was born in 1943 in Bombay, and he has been making feature films at least since 1978, where he began with the wonderful and very unusual Arvind Desai ki Ajeeb, Dastan. And there are a series of films that you might have seen, Mohan Joshi Hazir Ho, Salim Langde Pe Matro. All of these are iconic films, all the way down to Naseem, which is 1995. He's also made work for television, but in recent years he has sort of transitioned to becoming more a writer than a filmmaker. And it is really in that capacity that we are speaking to him. But of course, conversations with you cannot but range across media. So I'm hoping that people get a sense of or a flavor of the book. Maybe if you would read a little bit from it for us to start us off, and then we'll launch into the conversation. So this book is about his friendship, or the core of the book in some ways is the core premise is that he had a very close friendship with another filmmaker, Kundan Shah, who some of you may know as, again, an iconic person, an iconic director, most well known for his black comedy, Jaane Bhi Do Yaaro. I'll let Saeed Saab read the...
Thank you for having me. So let me start the soliloquy. Why am I writing this book? Is it because I feel it is necessary and my time is running out? Perhaps that is true. It is becoming more and more difficult to remember the conversations, camaraderie, intellectual debates, and dialectical upheavals with a friend. And then I think, will all of this make sense to my readers? What are they going to make of it? I don't know, but I have to get this off my chest. I have to present this wonderful, crazy, and vulnerable friend of mine to the world because he deserves it. And also because I firmly believe he had not lost it. There was that time when people said, he's lost it. In fact, towards the end of his life, his more and more surreal, bizarre, and sometimes viciously crude representations of reality came so much closer to the sordid truth of our times that it was embarrassing to quite a few of his friends and admirers. Was it because they saw their own acquiescence to the state of affairs difficult to stomach? Perhaps. I also hope the reader will find the book interesting despite its social and political stance, because there's a story in it. A story of a deeply passionate Indian and world citizen. A citizen who, by using humor, the absurd and the grotesque, attempted to unravel our times and the world we have all inherited. I say this because he had reached a point in his journey which forced him to strip away the frills and facades of our reality and see it for what it really was, its essence, compassionless, grotesque, with moments of beauty. That was the way he saw it, not just India, but the world. It was not pretty. It was bleak, gloomy, amoral, yet starkly poetic, and at times ironic and excruciatingly funny. In fact, each failure seemed to push him to further extremes till his final film, which was a political memoir about our scoundrel times. Yes, that film was deeply flawed, but was his grotesque representation of a political reality very far from the truth? The short, unassuming man in glasses, who looked more like a clerk than a filmmaker, had been through a tumultuous journey, and I believe it is a journey worth revealing. He attempted to unmask the big lie that all of us have to live to accept the political, economic, and social circumstances we find ourselves in. In a strange way, I also believe he was born to be inflicted with pain because he could no longer be just a filmmaker, and this is his story. It is also the story about two people who could not have been more different from each other and who, over time and circumstance, built an incredibly strong bond of trust and friendship. You could even call them comrades. Kundan Shah and I, Saeed Mirza. This book is our perception of the world we have all inherited.
It's clear when one reads the book that Kundan Shah was not just a very close friend of yours, but one of your primary interlocutors. And I wondered if you'd tell the people watching how that came to be, because clearly you came from very different backgrounds, and you talk about that in the book. I was very struck by the change that you describe over the course of the 3-year period of college, something very familiar to a lot of people. You capture, I think, very vividly the process of change because both of you come from very different backgrounds, very different languages, very different classes perhaps also, and there is a very slow coming together. And I wonder if you talk about that.
When we joined the film school, I approached the subject of learning with an open space that I would see and talk about things, and to register as openly as possible. And when you're seeing a film or talking or listening to a person talk, you're listening. But then I also noticed there was this one guy in the class who was continuously taking down notes, which was very irritating. I said, come on, now listen, When you're seeing a film, look at the film, take it in. But there he was in the dark theater with a little torchlight making notes, and then a little later, a couple of other people, students joined him. They were all taking down notes, so we called them the Gang of Three. I could never imagine that this kind of person who just keeps taking down notes rather than would ever be any kind of, what kind of filmmaker would he be? This is the mentality of a pen pusher, yeah.
It's too nerdy for you.
Nerdy, very nerdy, and he's a pen pusher. Come on, filmmaking is beyond that. I interrupt this and I apologize, but these things happen at times. So let it continue because it's cinema verite.
Absolutely.
It's allowed. So, I apologize for this phone ringing.
Fine. Please go ahead.
So,
it's a pen pusher, you said.
A pen pusher. And then I said, what kind of filmmaker would he be? And therefore, we should discuss aesthetics and politics and art and music. And these guys, this Gang of Three, always said, what the hell has cinema got to do with politics, for God's sake? It's separate. Cinema is cinema. And so therefore there'll be this constant debate between quite a few of us and this gang, which was saying, cinema is pure. Nothing to do with politics, and let cinema be, don't contaminate us. In fact, they should keep away from us. But over time, he started reading a little more, and then the effect of the film that they were seeing took a toll on them and sort of sucked them into the vortex of cinema. Because we are seeing cinema from all over the world. Great stuff. And by the end of it, one felt that he was getting absorbed into cinema, not just, there are other things to it, much more. But at that particular point of time, I dismissed him as being one more scholarly guy who's going to be maybe a good critic, or he'll write tomes on how to make films or whatever, but he'll never be a filmmaker. And then we saw his final film, the diploma film.
Right. At the end of the 3 years.
At the end of the 3 years, that's the final film that he made. And when I saw it, it was a pure gem.
Would you tell us a bit about that film?
There's a film called Banga. It's a very crazy silent film about guys trying to rob a bank and a lot of shooting going on, and but nobody's dying. And a lot of pistols and guns. And then finally there's a gang which goes away, and they walk away into all different directions. And at the end of it all, there's two members left, and they're walking towards almost nowhere. And that was the end. That was the film. But the sheer anarchy of it, and controlled.
Controlled anarchy. That is, of course,
it's a contradiction in terms, because controlled anarchy, and then, my God. And for me personally, it was the best film of our batch. But that's when we were parting, because once the 3 years is over, we shake hands, say, Khuda Hafiz, ab log jaiye. You go to Mumbai, you go to Calcutta, you go to abroad if you're a foreign student, whatever, whatever. And I got down to making my first film, etc. And then I heard this gang had moved to Hyderabad to do short work over there because they couldn't take the impact of Mumbai or whatever. So they were doing all kinds of odd jobs in Hyderabad. And then about a couple of years later, I heard that Kundan Shah had quit filmmaking. He had gotten married and he'd migrated to England with his wife. He would no longer be involved with films. And I thought to myself, my God, what a waste. You're so bloody talented. Of course, he did come back, but the impact of that information when it came to me that he had left,
Right.
and he was no longer going to be making films. He got married, he was going to take up some job in England. The impact that it had on me, I said, my God, he can't do that.
Yeah.
He's talent.
So in some ways, actually, it's even at the end of the 3 years, it's not then that the friendship has emerged.
It has
appreciation for his talent.
Appreciation for his talent, and we got to be a little leg pulling towards the end, but that was it. It wasn't friendship at all.
Right.
It's when he comes back from England and he needs a job,
Yeah.
and he starts working with me, and then I sense so much more. And my God, when you're making Albert Pinto.
Is that when he had come back from England?
I mean, in fact, because his first job was with me. He had heard in England that Saeed Mirza is starting a second film and maybe he'll give me a job.
Yes, I read that.
And his wife said, I want to go back,
Yeah.
And wife supported him and he came back to India. And when he came to my office, all of us sitting there, there's Kundan enters, And he got this job. But the point is, he was such an asset in that film of Albert Pinto. He was everywhere, and he was indispensable.
He was your first AD.
First AD.
Yes.
And that was it. Then, of course, he started branch off on his own, but he came back home.
Yeah.
And in my book, I have written that fact that about these migrations of people from trading business backgrounds, when they go abroad and but they see a future. And that last time I remember, Kundan could no longer be a trader. He had tasted poetry. He had to come back.
Yes, and I wonder whether we might use that because, of course, like your book, this conversation cannot be a linear one. And I want to say to everyone watching that you can definitely follow through where we're going. So the thing that you were saying about having tasted poetry is a theme that occurs in the book, this idea of poetry. And I wonder if you would say a little about what that meant to him, but perhaps also to you, to be watching films in this time. You say in the book that the Film Institute was a place of magic, but I think perhaps it was also a time of magic.
It's a place and a time, because you must remember, here is a nation being born. There's stuff happening around all over the world, liberation movements in Patna kya kya, Vietnam War, Latin America with guerrilla movements, and in Africa and India we got the Naxalite movement. Yeah. The Northeast is up in flames,
Yeah.
And you've got cinema that's occurring simultaneously. And cinema from around the world, and Europe emerging from the horrors of the Second World War, and cinema that's emerging from those times. So what are you getting? What an eclectic mix of cinemas. And you are a witness to that. And in my book I mentioned, who are these creators? Who the hell were they? They were anarchists and fascists and dropouts and musicians and acrobats, I don't know, philosophers.
This is, when you say this, you mean the people that were taken into the Film Institute in
No,
India?
no. The people who made the films,
right.
and whose films we were watching.
Yes.
They were all kinds, and incredible stuff. So you didn't know what was hitting you, and yet you were taking it all in, and it is mesmerizing, the stuff. Today, young people have access to through YouTube and the internet, and they have access to all this material. At that time, remember, it wasn't
Absolutely.
it wasn't available to
Absolutely.
them. So you had the National Film Archives as being the source, the motherlode,
Yeah.
and stuff that's coming through to us, and we were seeing films. It was like we were, and that sucks you in, and that. Plus, remember, there was in those times, like there were so many ghosts walking around the film school. The ghosts of great filmmakers. There's a ghost of Kurosawa or Mizoguchi, and there's a ghost of Ritik Ghatak and Satyajit Ray, and there's a ghost of Mani Kaul, John Abraham, Arvindan.
Yeah.
It's all happening, and it's Rahat Yusufi.
Who you talk about in the book as something
Yeah, and
that was
these
an
are
ex-student.
yeah, and these are ghosts, and then you have and cinema, and therefore it is part myth, part legend, part real. It's all happening simultaneously. Was it? What was it? Was it a dream? Was it real? Was it magic realism? All blended into one, and then you've got the wisdom tree, under which you sat and talked and discussed and fought, went on strike, and I don't know, all kinds of, and you drank.
Yeah.
So it's all happening in a space, and in that, there's Kundan Shah and Saeed Mirza.
And it's a very cinematic image, of course, the wisdom tree. For everyone that doesn't know, there was an actual tree, not just a magic tree, though of course it was a little bit magic. This tree called the wisdom tree, under which FTII students hang out. I wonder if you'd say a little bit about the kind of disagreements, well, especially the crux of the disagreement between you and Kundan Shah unfolding cinematically under that tree.
Fundamentally,
art as some kind of
politics,
pure.
the purity of art as opposed to imposing politics into art.
Yeah.
And the debate was being that art is pure, politics is an infringement.
And how do you think Kundan Shah changed his mind?
I think by the sheer assault of all the films that he was seeing, that's one.
Right.
That got him also.
Yes.
And plus, simultaneously, we were seeing films that were coming from Latin America, which were films of revolt and revolution and change and mayhem and coup d'etats and things. We're seeing all of that. So he's seeing a world suddenly. So then even his reading started shifting a little. Kundan, and he started moving in that direction. And towards the end, like I remember him, the kind of books I started reading, like even towards the end, almost towards the end of the final year, he talks about he's reading poetry and Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and there's a tinge of, and Chris Marker.
The conversation about Marxists.
Marxists, and,
Yes.
and this, I said, no, they aren't too bad, in fact. Perhaps they're okay, the mark, lefties are perhaps okay in a sense, but don't get too close to them because they can contaminate you. But don't get too close to them. But that was the stake towards the end, and that was where we ended ourselves at
that time.
in
the 70s.
And at the institute.
At the institute, yes.
So he still was a free man, uncontaminated, but he had read about politics, but he was not going to, and he went abroad.
And he had that past that he'd grown up with, that vision of the good life, of running a business, starting a family, and yet when he goes to England, in the hope of achieving that vision, something changes. How
England changed him.
Made it impossible.
Suddenly realized it's not just racism.
Yes.
You when you try to understand racism, you have no choice but to get into history and politics and into sociology.
Yes.
You have no choice now, and you're slowly sucked in.
खुद पे मार.
तो अगर आप देखें ये होता क्यों है? And then you start asking a lot of questions about ethnicity, of color of skin, gender.
Yeah.
You are pulled in, you're sucked, and then the rest is history. You have no recourse. You have no other way out. You just have to enter this world now.
Yeah.
Which you had rejected.
Yes.
Earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Suddenly, Tariq Ali, the the student leader, or Daniel Cohn-Bendit of France, suddenly they start making sense to you. And you're reading of these student leaders and trade union leaders. All that's Suddenly Noam Chomsky enters your frame. No.
Yeah.
So all this stuff is
This
happening.
has all happened to Kundan.
Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah.
I think it's a remarkable journey that you describe, because the book is a marvelous genre-bending exercise. I mean, it's a biography in part, a memoir in part, and very much also a conversation with the present. And there are very few people that
Oh, yes.
stitch all of those things together. So I've really enjoyed reading it, and I mean, people will have to read the book to find out where it leads them. But I was wondering whether you might say, and perhaps I'll read out a little section from the book, which will I think make it clearer to our audience.
He says, you say, that outburst of Kundan in 1989 revealed a lot of other lessons that had to be learnt. How had I not read the signs that he had talked about? Most of the voluble, visible lefties at film school came from a certain background. They were from elite schools and colleges, were English-speaking, and exuded a casual confidence in social relationships. They talked about justice and equality, discussed wars and liberation movements, debated about history, aesthetics, and art with confidence, and yet spoke in a language far removed from the rest of the students. Besides, they dealt with ideas for their intrinsic value rather than through lived experience. How the hell then could they reach out to the rest of the students? And I'd say not just students, the world, the rest of the world. Did they even attempt to, you ask? But the argument went far beyond our campus. It would extend to the world at large as social and political activists attempted to identify with and fight for the causes of the underprivileged, the unequal, and the disenfranchised. They would have to realize, and this is the part I really want us to pay attention to, I guess, in the conversation, that it was not good enough to talk about ideas change in philosophy. What was also important was the language in which these were conveyed.
Absolutely.
So I
the
wanted
language in which it is conveyed, because when the language turns esoteric,
Yes.
it does not resonate with people.
Yes.
So now, how do you remove that? Because the ideas themselves, are incredible value of the ideas, it's there. Intrinsic value, it is there. But the language that you use has to resonate. What do you mean by justice? What do you mean by fraternity?
Yes.
What do you mean by equality? What the hell does it actually mean? And therefore, when you say that disenfranchised, इसका मतलब क्या है? इसका मतलब क्या है? तो आप कौन सी ज़बान में बोलेंगे?
हाँ, तो पहला तो ये है कि अंग्रेजी में बोल रहे
एक तो अंग्रेजी में, दूसरी ये
That literally-
अंग्रेजी is part of our language, part of an
Absolutely.
Indian language, but nevertheless it's spoken by very few people.
Yes.
तो ये तो this is a given.
Yeah.
अगर आप हिंदी में जाएंगे, आप संस्कृत में बोलेंगे, speak in Hindustani,
हाँ.
speak in language which is understandable,
Yeah.
colloquial.
Yeah.
खड़ी बोली में तो the point I'm getting at is you cannot speak in Persian or Sanskrit or in English.
If it is not understood. Yes.
What's the point?
Absolutely.
And therefore, like I keep saying, history is littered with the corpses of good intentions, because the intentions are valid, good, noble in fact at times.
Yes.
But Zaban kiski hai? Whose language is it?
Yeah.
And it's got to be, that's very critical.
Yeah.
And if I can give you an example of, in today's terms, that's the poetry of Namdev Dhasar, the Marathi poet.
बिल्कुल.
Oh, and now that is a people's language. It's angry. But it comes from actual lived pain
Yes.
and experience. It smells of it. And he brings it into his language, you can smell it.
And the city and its
And you can
darkness
smell, you
and
can, you know,
Gundita,
the
yeah.
Dalit writers, you know, you
Absolutely.
can smell it.
Yeah.
तो वो दर्द से निकलता है ज़बान. And then they उसको निचोड़ के when they dish it out.
But I mean, if I can ask you to go further than this, because of course some people will have experience to ring for perhaps a closer connection to, I don't know what we can call it, the ground or something. But if you don't, and you're trying to represent other people's lives or come closer to talking about justice or talking about equality, you may not have been the person को वो मार पड़ चुकी है.
Absolutely.
That's still an entirely valid exercise.
Absolutely valid.
Do you think we've though managed it as artists or as left-wing, left-liberal? You know, there's been so much debate about this, and yet I think we are in a time in 2022 at the end of it, of this year almost, thinking about whether we've managed to communicate any of these
No,
things.
no, we
in
did.
our
We did.
cinema.
We know that
What do you think about
it was
now?
done. It was done correctly. But the point is, it's been distorted today because the counter narrative is एक तो अंग्रेजी में थी, and the counter narrative has structured itself in a kind of way which says, अंग्रेजी में अगर आप बोलेंगे, in the most ordinary English, वो तो अंग्रेजी तो है. They've nullified the language itself.
So it doesn't matter what you're saying.
It doesn't matter what you're saying and how you're saying it. They've nullified the language first. एक तो ये चीज़ है. दूसरी चीज़ ये है, उनकी ज़बान देखिए, जिससे वो जो is fundamentally Sanskrit. Whose language is it? But when it comes down to the core issues of their ideology,
Yes.
गोली मारो सारों को. Language is street language now.
Yes. They speak.
देश के गद्दारों को
Yes.
गोली मारो सारों को.
Yes.
So for the Sanskrit, bum, this is the dog whistle.
Yeah.
This reaches out to people.
Yes.
वो भूल जाइए आप.
हाँ.
And this is, और ये इस्तेमाल करते हैं.
Yeah. Yeah, there are different registers, and yes, certainly the right speaks in several registers, literally in several languages.
Thank you.
Do you think though that perhaps, and you talk about this a little bit in the book, and it's kind of related, which is that about trying to find a language, but do you think that it is possible, and how might we find a language in a time when also the media is invested, a lot of the mainstream media in this country, and you speak about the mainstream media in this country as well, in the last 8 years, and perhaps longer actually, is invested in not showing us aspects of reality. How does one even begin to address
That's
that
a battle
situation?
that we've got to find out fresh ways of communications. Like for instance, your channel itself is, what is it? It is an alternative
Yes.
platform.
Yes.
And God bless it, because that's the only way you can do it. And so more of these alternative platforms would be necessary. I cannot think of any other way of communicating otherwise. You require, because the mainstream media has its own agenda, and it is by and large parroting the agenda of the ruling elite,
Yes.
of the regime. It is by and large, and it's incredibly supportive. It is the band Baja Barat of the system. It is the status quo.
Yeah.
So therefore, now what do? You've got to find ways and means of countering it. I don't have the answer to it,
No.
but I have the question for it. Now, young people have to do that. Figure
Yes.
out कैसे करेंगे.
As you.
And it's a battle which is going to be endless, because as a world gets more and more wired in and more linked together economically, basically economically,
Yeah.
they're going to find ways and means of just shutting people out.
Yes. I think.
And therefore, thou shalt not think. And in fact, the COVID thing is a prime example. It's a bonanza for these people.
Yes.
You
It is.
separate, you move people away from each other, and they can't come together. And then simultaneously, this actual concentration of resources on entertainment,
Yes.
sports and entertainment, because nothing else is happening in the world.
Yes, and I think in some ways the media is very much, the mass media has been very much involved in that
Oh,
shifting
yes.
of the narrative, right?
Absolutely.
So the blocking out of certain things and the focus on entertainment.
Because
I think is-
if you focus on the other thing, that's the real world.
Yeah.
And you cannot focus over there because things have gone awry.
Yeah.
We have a political and economic system that's dysfunctional.
Yeah.
In the lives of ordinary citizens, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what do? you end up with sports and entertainment.
Yeah. Do you think though that if you look back, since so much of this book is about the past in some ways, in the 70s, when you started making films and Kundan Shah starts making films, the predominant popular film industry is also providing what was critiqued then and can be critiqued now
Well,
as
absolutely.
pure entertainment. Do you think
Mix.
there were more spaces then for
Far
alternative
more,
visions?
far more.
So
But now the myth making now is that look, you've got the OTT platform and look what's happening. Look at the release, and of course a lot of work is being done. A lot of people are getting work. A lot of outer work actors and wonderful
there's
actors.
lots more work
Lots
in the
more work.
industry. Yeah,
but
that
the
is
question
true.
that needs to be asked is a lot happening in what they want to say. What can you say? Yes, there's much more sex and violence. It's whatever else, language,
Cuss words.
cuss words,
Yeah.
and you think you're free.
Yeah.
But it is globalized finance coming together, and simultaneously now, can you say what you really want to say in these films?
Yeah.
That's the question which needs to be asked. I do not think so. If you actually step out of line, you're given a script. This is it, and this is you step out of it. You will not be allowed to. You can go that much and no further. You get it's a sense of liberty. It's a sense of but that's it. Beyond that, no way. You will not be allowed.
So do you think that the difference between the 70s and 80s and 90s and now is that we have more of a delusional sense of liberty?
I think so.
Yeah. And do you think
We are deluded into thinking we are free.
yeah, when you because you do travel a lot across the country, when you talk to younger people or any people actually of all ages, do you feel like people recognize that at all? Do you meet people that recognize it? There might be young filmmakers or anybody. I wondered if you wanted to say, it's hard to bring in some of your travels appear in this. For instance, your time in Kashmir.
Right.
And I wondered whether you want to say what it's like when you are talking about these things to people now. Is there anything that
there's a section in it which I talk about the Kundan's pet theory of the cabal.
Yes, the conspiracy theory. And I wondered, actually, perhaps, why don't you just tell us?
No, it's a theory that he had, which is called the Zeitgeist film, made by, I forget the name of John Peters or something, that was the name of Here he presented his thesis to the world. And he laid it out. It was a combination of Marxist analysis and conjecture and real information and hard facts. And he presented a thesis about how this world is run by a bunch of bankers, a cabal of bankers and very powerful people who decide how the world will be run. Deep pockets, vile intentions, and those are the guys that said that's Kundan theory. But they can create wars and can give you peace, and they can go, they run the world. Now the point is, it's a theory that has a semblance of truth. Now, how much of it is conspiracy, how much of it is real, I don't quite know. And these are the times that we're living in.
Yes.
These are the times we're living in, and I can't figure out one from the other. But that was Kundan's theory, that there is a group of incredibly powerful people. Whether they exist or not is immaterial to me, but I do know the world is run by the powerful.
Yeah.
That any thinking human being is run by the powerful and for them.
Yes, and that is a pattern.
And that's a pattern, and therefore, whatever benefits the non-powerful get, they should be thankful they're getting it.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. So we're certainly in a time when the discourse of rights has been replaced by that of privileges.
Absolutely. This is a fact, and this is the truth. This is the truth. So that even can't be debated. And that's why Bernie Sanders resonates in America.
And yet not enough.
Not enough, and no, he was enough, but then stopped.
Yes.
At the last moment, stopped because John Cassius, has a lean and hungry look.
Yes.
Such men are dangerous.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It is a time in which one wants to
So
be...
such men are dangerous. So therefore, keep him out and the Democratic Party selects Hillary Clinton as the party candidate to fight Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders is sidelined. Now, how did it happen? According to Kundan, that's the cabal.
Yeah.
That's the cabal that's coming in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not
Power brokers behind saying, yaar, isko mat leo, he's cutting too close to the bone. Because the man is saying very clearly,
system he dismantle ho jayega.
and wo keh raha कि this is not the land of the free and the brave, this is the land for and of the powerful. That's it.
Yeah.
And people are accepting him in the hundreds of thousands, in the millions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now what do you do? Anyway.
So I want to bring us back to India, and I wanted to ask you. It's related to what you said just a little while ago about how it's a hard time to tell what is true and what is not true. And there's one moment where you talk, for instance, about the Ayodhya judgment and Kundan Shah's response to the 2002 riots in Gujarat, the pogrom in Gujarat, and his response to one of the things that you say, quoting him, is that faith has its own truth. And I wondered, because that sentence in some way is also the kind of thing that the other side says, right? And
that's
yet,
what the court used.
right?
The court used these words, faith, and it's a nation's conscience
Yeah.
that has to be
Yeah.
calmed. The
Yeah.
conscience of a nation
Yeah.
through faith. So, law does not matter. So if anybody gets disturbed by his conscience, gets disturbed by by law, the law is removed. Faith takes over. Another point is, so what is the law really all about then? I mean, imagine the Supreme Court saying that the demolition was illegal. Illegal. That's a court saying, Supreme Court.
Yes.
It was, and the fact that it was built over a temple, not substantiated at all. There's no evidence of that. The arrival of those idols were manipulated and fake.
All of this is acknowledged in the judgment.
In the judgment.
Yes.
And yet, the temple has to be built because faith of the people. So therefore, handing over the land to the demolition squad. As simple as that. Those guys who did it illegally, manufactured those idols, there was no evidence of that, but it goes to them. That's the law. Look at the absurdity of it.
So do you think
This is Brechtian. This is a Bertolt Brecht. I can't believe this, but it's there. That's the way it is. Now, to soothe the conscience of a nation, all right, pacify them. That's why a woman is raped. She sees people killed around her. Some people are sentenced, they go to jail and they come out and they garlanded. And they fed pidas.
Yeah.
And it's accepted.
Yeah.
They've done this horrific crimes,
Yeah.
and they've been indicted, released. Look at the absurdity. These are our times. If I don't call it absurd, what is?
Yeah. But do you think that question of faith, which is being, do you think that that's true when you meet people in the country across,
No, when you travel, my gosh, it's another country. And when you meet ordinary people,
Yeah.
my God, you regain. They've retained their humanity to such a large extent that gives you faith that all is not lost.
Yeah.
All is not lost. You do regain faith when you meet ordinary people.
So maybe to segue back into the past, one of the most remarkable, there are many fantastic sort of memories in this book, and one of the really striking ones, which it is a book filled with detail, and I thought one of the striking moments, and this book is also lovely because it has so much visual in it, and a combination of photographs and artwork, and this wonderful rat who is somewhere between a human being and a cartoon, and he's a very...
And the title of the book should be read out.
Absolutely, I did. I Know the Psychology of Rats, which is a quote from Kundan Shah. I wondered if, so one incident where, you talk about being in Delhi in the 1970s in the CPM party office, in the lawns, and the Afghan activists that come in, and you speak to them, and then you segue into an account of what has happened in Afghanistan. And I wondered, somehow it really struck me as a sort of, and the sort of, it connects in some way to all of these large narratives, that the failures of progressive revolutions, or
That's true.
and I wondered whether you want to say something about that for Afghanistan, but also perhaps for India, and then we can...
No, but the thing was, it was also Kundan Shah getting a lesson on politics when he was there. He was there at
that meeting,
at the Afghan delegation.
Yeah.
And he was asking most of the questions. But these are journeys, these are things, these are lessons that Kundan picked up. Well, like, for instance, you have the 1984 riots in Delhi, and he's shocked by that, and the repercussions in a city like Mumbai. Kundan Shah is picking up stuff about what is happening in the world. But it's also to realize, I think, how over time, when rationality gives way to something else which is far more insidious, which is far more emotional. And that seems to be touching chords with people. So when you say, damn it, aren't people concerned with jobs or education or health and prices, isn't that important? And they say, yeah, but Hinduism is at stake.
Yeah.
Or Islam khatre mein. I don't know. These are...
Yes.
And it seems to supersede.
Yeah. The emotive power...
The material, actual material existence of people is negated, and over something which is ephemeral.
Yes, and is abstract.
And just abstract,
And,
but it seems to work.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to get at, because it seems that the ways of he, she, it are mysterious. The God, when you bring God into the picture,
Yeah.
or any God into the picture,
Yeah.
you can't have a debate.
Yeah.
Because you're debating with God, and you can't do that now, can you?
Yeah. I wanted to end with a question. I mean, there's a lot in this book where we see Kundan Shah changing and learning from reading, from widening his mind. I wondered whether you'd like to say what you learned from Kundan Shah.
What did I learn from Kundan Shah? I think what I learned from him was his passion and his integrity. He said, Saeed, no matter what you do, you have to do that with complete faith in that act. Then something's going to happen. You can't do it outside of it. So therefore, total concentration and integrity for that particular act is so critically important for any piece of work. Writing, books, films, anything. You have to have that passion towards it. And nothing else matters except that. Otherwise it doesn't work. That's good. And the other thing was, of course, that, Saeed, we are small budget filmmakers. Every rupee, Saeed, this is the trader coming out.
Yes.
Every rupee has to be made into 3. How do you do that? You find out, because that's the only way you can make a film. All right,
Yeah.
That's Kundan Shah.
Yes. The budget is important.
Budget, how do you do it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's a marvelous portrait and more. So I hope a lot of people will read more of this. There is no way to encompass the range of this book in this conversation. I hope we've given you all a taste of it. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.